Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, good whatever time it is for you. And welcome. This is Ocean Robbins. I'm so excited that in about 14 minutes, we're going to begin our broadcast of episode 4 of the Food Revolution Summit Docuseries. Today, our focus is going to be on eating to beat cancer and type 2 diabetes, what you need to do now. The sad reality is that the war on cancer isn't going as well as we'd like. Certainly, there have been some life-saving advances, and some of them are huge, but despite trillions of dollars spent and millions of lives lost, cancer is still the world's second leading cause of death. And type 2 diabetes is catching up fast. It's now the world's fastest growing chronic disease. And it might surprise you to learn that these two conditions are more connected than we might have thought. It turns out there are specific foods to eat and not eat to dramatically reduce the risk of both of these conditions, leading to more balanced blood sugar and more vitality in every cell of our bodies. Today, you're going to get the facts and the latest scientific breakthroughs. As we go through the day, post and engage in the comments section on the broadcast page. You can share your ahas, your breakthroughs, your questions, and what this means in your life, what you're learning, and how it matters, and where you're struggling, and how it matters. Let us know, and also please feel free to engage with other folks. Respond to their comments so we can keep this conversation going and feel the power of this food revolution movement, with people all over the world joining in and participating and engaging and learning and growing together. Lynette said, "Hello, Ocean and all. Wow, the first 3 episodes are out of this world. I love watching this. I watched the last series too. I'm so all into this and don't understand why we can't get it through the heads of other people. Why isn't this taught in schools? Our bodies are so amazing. People don't realize what the body does, and it's what you feed it that leads to what you get out of it. I've been doing a live on Facebook with a friend each week for the last 2 years, and we talk about these subjects, all the different foods, what they do to the body, and why we need them. We also talk about what happens when you eat the wrong foods. These subjects are just outstanding, and the doctors here are giving us so much information. It's fantastic. People say everything in moderation. Now, I totally disagree with this saying. Ocean, we are blessed to have your wisdom here. Your knowledge on these subjects is amazing, thanks to you and your dad." Well, Lynette, thank you so much, and thank you for spreading the word. We want to make it a little easier for you to spread the word, so we're going to gift you with an empowerment package. So you're going to own all of the recordings and the transcripts of the entire summit for life, and you can share what you learn in your Facebook Lives and in your work. Thank you. Bless you. I hope that it supports you in your journey. Our team will follow up with you. And I want to highlight something that Lynette just said to us, which is that people say everything in moderation, right? And of course, the sugar industry loves to say that, that the proper amount of sugar is a moderate amount. Well, actually, I'm not so sure that that's true. You wouldn't say, oh, heroin in moderation, right? A little crack cocaine in moderation. You wouldn't do that, right? Because we know that certain things are just not healthy in any quantity. So the key thing here, I think, is to know that some foods are good for us and some are not. And there's no proper amount of unhealthy foods. Although that doesn't mean you can't cheat a little bit on the edges at a birthday party or once in a while if that works for you. We're not talking about signing a purity pact here. But it wouldn't be fair to try to make an argument that a little bit of super processed foods is actually healthy for the human body, because it would be very hard to make that argument. So yeah, I think that some of us need bright lines. We need crisp understandings of what foods are good for us, and that can be helpful too. Not everyone's the same. Not everyone has the same brain. Some people respond differently to different motivating factors. So if you're the kind of person who can't have just one drink, who needs a sharp line or a clear boundary, then I want to support you in that. If you're the kind of person who actually does better when you feel a little flexible, when you feel like there's something too rigid, a part of you rebels and you fall off the wagon completely, then give yourself some slack. Give yourself lots of love. In fact, give yourself lots of love no matter what. If you just joined us, we're going to be starting episode 4 of the Food Revolution Summit in about 10 minutes. I'm Ocean Robbins, your host, and I'm so happy now to be sharing welcoming words. We heard from Erin Marie, who said, "Wonderful expert insights into the biochemistry of the brain and nutritional strategies to optimize brain health. I have seen a plethora of patients who would have benefited from the Food Revolution Summit." As a family and geriatric nurse practitioner, I see many patients with diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular and cerebrovascular disease, and neurological conditions, traumatic brain injury, AD, and post-stroke sequela. I do not always advocate for a plant-based diet, but will do so now wholeheartedly. Erin Marie, thank you so much for being with us and sharing that with us. And thank you for being on this learning journey. And I think Erin Marie's message is an interesting reference point for all of us, because we all have an opportunity with what we learn to apply it in some way. Not all of us are nurse practitioners. Not all of us work with patients in the health professions, but all of us know people who eat. All of us are part of shaping culture in our families, in our communities, in our homes, in our lives. And so every single one of us, as we step forward and learn this and apply what we're learning more deeply in our lives, we all have a sacred opportunity to be a positive influence. And that can help change not just your life and what you're learning here today, but so many others. What would it feel like to know that everywhere you go, you're helping to spread health, helping to help people feel a little better, helping people to walk a little lighter and have more vitality? And that effectively can be the impact just through being a food revolutionary and contributing to this movement in whatever ways make sense to you. Leslie said, tears of gratitude for this information that will help all of us to thrive. It's so upsetting that our food system is so corrupt. Time to take back our power. And thank you, Ocean and John, for this revolution. Leslie, yes, thank you. I agree. It is very frustrating when we see a status quo of highly processed junk foods and factory farmed animal products that are normalized and subsidized and mainstreamized and advertised. When we see junk food companies marketing to kids, when we see political leaders passing bills that subsidize things like high fructose corn syrup and factory farmed animal products, effectively creating marketplace distortions that make it so that healthy food costs more. It can be very frustrating. However, you're so right that we're building a revolution here, a food revolution, a healthy food revolution, taking our lives back, taking our power back, and helping to take that back the systems of a status quo that's become toxic by normalizing and spreading the word about what's possible around another way of eating, which is spreading and is growing. You know, when I was a kid, there was no soy milk in supermarkets. Now you've got so many different plant milks. When I was a kid, there was no organic food section in supermarkets. Now it's all over the place. So we are seeing a growth of people taking an interest in food that is real, that is pesticide-free, that is natural, that is wholesome, that's plant-based. More and more of that is spreading around the world because of consumers, because of people like us eating differently, which creates a marketplace demand, which helps to shift and turn the wheels of history. So thank you, Leslie, for being part of that. Karen said, I'm so enjoying this summit. My husband died 9 months ago of heart failure at 68 years old. Losing him was a huge unexpected blow, but also was a wake-up call for my own health. I read Dr. Furman's book, which started my journey to a plant-based life. In 6 months, I've lost 40 pounds, and I'm feeling like a different person. I have 30 more pounds to go. My goal is to be as healthy at this age as possible. I'm soaking up your summit like a sponge. I want to empower my journey with knowledge. I totally expect to achieve my goal, and I can't imagine going back to my previous lifestyle any longer. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the summit. Karen, thank you so much for sharing. I'm so sorry about the loss of your husband. We send our love to you and our support to you, and I'm so grateful that you're on this healing journey and that you're getting your health back and your life back in the process. And yes to you, getting those X 30 pounds off and continuing on maintaining and sustaining in a right-sized body. We're sending you lots of love in the journey. If you've just joined us, I'm Ocean Robbins, and I'm sharing a few welcoming words. We're going to be starting episode 4 in the Food Revolution Summit in about 5 minutes, and I'm here welcoming you to day 4. Diane Jarvis said, I appreciate the professionals who are sharing knowledge in this series. Also, I do think the music is distracting. Diane, thanks for letting us know. So we did put background music in on a lot of the episodes. As you have noticed, I'm sorry that isn't working so well. It was intended to be theme music like you see in movies and so forth, but obviously we haven't quite hit the mark on the music, so we'll do better next year. Thank you for the feedback. There's no way to turn it off, though. It's part of the soundtrack for the whole episodes. But thank you, and we're sorry that that's been difficult. Of course, everyone, if you have the volume not quite right, you can always adjust that, of course, on whatever device you're listening on to get the overall volume optimized. Vivian said, thank you so much for continuing to provide these life-saving summits every year. I've tuned into many of these over the years, and I always come away with so many wonderful points. I've tried several times to stay on a plant-based diet. Now at 73, I'm really hoping to succeed, and this summit is what I need to motivate me, not to mention your new cookbook. I can't wait to get my hands on it. Thank you again for not giving up on us. Vivian, thank you so much for sharing that. And, I think you're not the only one who may struggle sometimes with this reality that there's a difference between knowing what to do and doing what we know. And for a lot of us, that's the gap, right? Everybody knows they need to eat less sugar and processed junk. Everybody knows they need to eat more vegetables. But doing it isn't always easy. So we are wanting to pair knowledge with action. And this summit is all about knowledge, but we're also hoping to give you tools for effective action. That's why we've got the 3 recipes of the day, every day of the summit. That's why Food Revolution Network has a website with hundreds and hundreds of articles on all the critical food and health topics of our times, and lots of recipes from most of our articles. We've got multiple recipes leading off from there. It's why we put on our membership program, Whole Life Club. If you stay on our email list, you'll learn more about that. And when you get an empowerment package, you actually get an opportunity to get a free trial of it. Whole Life Club is our ongoing membership community to help folks to sustain and optimize their health for life. It's where you go to stick with it over time. And we've got about 10,000 people in there, and we're just hearing the most heartwarming stories. This is where we're seeing the deepest results from the impact of our work. So that's a resource you may want to consider to help you. And of course, we also just heard Vivian mention the cookbook, and that's the Real Superfoods Cookbook, which comes out October 31. And people are getting it for pre-order now, so they can be the first people to have their hands on a copy. And it's about everyday ingredients to elevate your health. The real superfoods are not super expensive, super fancy, and with super big marketing budgets. The real superfoods are super affordable, they're super accessible, they're super nutritious, and they're super delicious when you know what to do with them, which is why it's a cookbook. Tony said, what I like best about the summit is the speakers are talking at an understandable level that is not so technical that I can't follow them. Good job so far. Thanks so much, Tony. Yes, we really work hard to make this accessible because, you know what, we don't need more. I mean, if you read medical journals, which I do quite a bit of, they're not written for us to read them. They're written to be super technically accurate. We want to be technically accurate, but we also want to translate that to a language that everyday folks can relate to and understand and apply in their lives. Because, again, it's not just about knowledge, it's also about impact and results and life choices. So now it is almost time for us to begin episode 4. And I want to say again, as we move through the day, please keep on sharing what you think, including your top takeaways, your aha moments, and how this is all landing in your life. Make sure you refresh the comments using the button that you can see on the broadcast page so you can see the latest ones that have been submitted. And I'll continue to read and share some of the comments that are coming in, and make sure to share any questions you might have coming up as well. If you have questions, please share them because I'll look forward to answering them a little bit later. Dawn said, sacred opportunity is correct. I heard tell that Mother Earth is crying out because we have separated ourselves away from her and her bounties. I do appreciate your series. Where do you have to be? Don said, where you do not have to be an herbalist, but be aware and conscious of all the gifts out there for our bodies in the green and in the colors of the vegetables. Your program is ever so important. Thank you, Don. It's true, you don't have to be an expert or a scientist or an herbalist to eat lots of awesome, super healthy foods and to apply what we're learning and reap tremendous benefits. All right, it looks like we're ready for episode 4. Here we go.
It's time for Food Revolution.
The food revolution is taking over.
The food revolution is life-changing.
The food revolution is essential.
Empowering.
Imperative.
The food revolution is rooted in compassion.
Inspiring.
Fantastic.
Life-saving.
The food revolution is transformative. It's powerful, and it's much needed in this time.
It's time for a food revolution.
It is time for a food revolution.
It's time for a food revolution.
Welcome back to the Food Revolution Summit 2023 docuseries. Today, we're going to look at cancer and diabetes and their relationship to food.
We've seen that doctors get almost no training in nutrition in medical school, and there are very few financial incentives in the medical system itself to treat disease with healthy food. Insurance will cover drugs and surgeries, but even though healthy food is a lot less expensive and in many cases more effective, insurance will rarely cover it.
It's true, and you won't find both diabetes and cancer discussed together on the agenda at any conventional medical conferences. Endocrinologists deal with diabetics, while oncologists work with cancer patients, and they have very little to say to each other.
But the idea that these two types of disease could have the very same root, cause, isn't just a fanciful new theory. We're going to look at the evidence that both cancer and diabetes may in fact be linked in large measure to the same dietary pattern.
We're going to start with cancer. The sober reality is that the war on cancer isn't going all that well. Sure, there have been some life-saving advances, but despite trillions of dollars spent and millions of lives lost, cancer is still the world's second leading cause of death.
The medical establishment focuses on chemotherapy, on radiation, and on surgery. But might diet and lifestyle actually be one of the keys we've been looking for?
What is cancer? How does it grow? One way to explore the question is through a thought exercise. What does a cancer cell want and need in order to survive?
Imagine like you're just a happy cell humming along through life inside a body, and then all of a sudden UV light, violet rays hit your skin cells, or too much alcohol hits that liver cell, and a mutation occurs. That is called initiation. Next step is proliferation. That little mutated cell's like, I want to live here for a really long time. What can I do? What do I need? I need blood flow. I need growth factors. I need estrogen. And it proliferates until it's like, now I'm kind of bored here. I'm going to step 3. Intravasate. I'm going to go into lymphatics and blood vessels, and then I'm going to step 4, circulate. And when I circulate and migrate through this blood system, I'm going to be like, boop, I'd like to get off here now. So liver, bone, brain, we extravasate. The cell now, this cancer cell, lands again in liver, and it's like, I'm all alone. I'm back to step 1, but I've been here before, so I'm going to proliferate all over again, getting all the things it needs to live in this liver. And then now it's accomplished step 6, metastasis. It will eventually, possibly, take over that organ, shut it down, and that's what causes someone's death.
Well, cancer is, obviously involves a disease of many tissues in our body, and so we have special names for the different cancers. But cancer starts out when a gene is mutated from a normal gene over to a gene that has a potential for cancer. There you have it. We have the seeds. We have cancer seeds in our body, so to speak. The traditional view has been that those genes, that are capable of generating cancer, are going to grow and over our lifetime and suddenly appear. And the entire emphasis on cancer has been on, what genes do we have and how do we damage these genes, etc. Well, what our research showed, what I was looking at seeing in the laboratory, was that it wasn't just about the genes. Yes, that's a starting place. But really, it was nutrition that controlled the expression of these genes. And so usually through, by a host of mechanisms all work together, quite frankly. And we have a couple of default mechanisms there that protect us on a routine basis. A higher protein diet, for example, would shut them down and would elevate all those mechanisms that turn cancer on. So and we never can predict when the cancer might occur. In theory, it probably occurs when we're, insulting ourselves for so long consuming animal-based diets. And so suddenly it appears, and, it appears depending on our relative susceptibility, I guess you could say.
A diagnosis of cancer can feel like it came out of the blue. No warning, nothing you could have done, just bad genes or bad luck, or maybe exposure to carcinogenic chemicals that you had no way to avoid. But is that really true? Is cancer predestined? Or are there things that most of us can do that can significantly tilt the odds in our favor?
It's really important to do what we can do, even though none of us knows if we will get a certain diagnosis. The lifestyle behaviors and the choices that we make with our nutrition can significantly decrease our risk of certain health conditions. So I did get breast cancer. I don't fully understand why. However, I do know that the nutrition that I ate during treatment, that helped me get through treatment, and it's also allowing me to thrive now. I know that the diet that I'm eating decreases my chance of recurrence. I'm getting some soy foods every day. I'm getting my whole food, plant predominant way of eating, a lot of fruits and vegetables, and I do my kale smoothie every day. So I know that what I'm eating helps me to feel good each day, to thrive. Even if you get a diagnosis, I think that you can look at what can I do as far as lifestyle behaviors to thrive. You are trying to have a healthier body, a more peaceful mind, and a more joyful heart.
At this point in the Food Revolution Summit docuseries, you probably won't be surprised to hear that the food you eat can make a big difference in your cancer risk.
There's no question that diet affects cancer, and for so many years we just assumed cancer was one of those things that was sort of out of our control. We couldn't, it was far less predictable than heart disease or diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes, and that there wasn't a lot we could do about it. We thought of it as something that was caused by genes and genetic mutations, but now we're recognizing that it's a very complex interaction between our genes and the environmental impacts that come our way, and the environment, it includes smoking, it includes exposure to toxic substances even in foods, but it also includes just the general dietary pattern. And so what we know is the foods that are most strongly linked to increased risk of cancer are red and processed meats, alcohol for sure, and then, of course, the highly processed foods with all the added fat and sugar and salt and so forth. Those seem to be the biggest factors. And then we have things like pesticides added to foods and heavy metals in foods, and even the manner in which we cook foods can provide additional carcinogens. So things like heterocyclic amines when we cook meat at high temperatures, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons when we, blacken foods, whatever kind of foods they might be, and the acrylamide when we fry potatoes, and the advanced glycation end products in processed meats when they're cooked. So all of those compounds factor in as well. And the foods that we know are most strongly linked to reduce risk, very consistent: vegetables, fruits, high fiber foods like whole grains and legumes, nuts and seeds, foods that are rich in vitamin C and provitamin A carotenoids. Those all tend to be protective.
The most common cancers are breast cancers, prostate cancer, and colon cancer. 3 dietary related cancers, right? We know that, breathing in toxins can, increase risk of cancers, and certainly there's unusual cancers that are linked to, like, acute blastocytic leukemias and lymphomas. There are children get cancer too, right? The leading cause of cancer in children is acute blastocytic leukemia, which is linked back to the lack of green vegetables in the mother's diet before pregnancy, before the baby was conceived, and the consumption of luncheon meats and nitrosamino compounds, which increases risk of both cancer, leukemia, lymphoma, and brain tumors in the offspring of the person consuming those foods. But most cancers are due to what people eat in their lifetime. And when I say we can win the war on cancer, it has to do with changing the diet of all Americans. This should be taught in schools, like reading, writing, arithmetic. Adults should learn it, children should learn it.
Decades before he wrote his seminal bestseller, The China Study, Dr. T. Colin Campbell helped to run a large research project in the Philippines. He arrived on the project fully expecting to validate the need for more animal protein among low-income children. But what happened next would change his life and our understanding of food and cancer forever.
My position in the Philippines on that project was the coordinator of a project developing a model for feeding malnourished children. And those children, they were malnourished primarily because they weren't getting enough protein. That meant animal-based protein, by the way, which is said to be higher quality. In any case, as we were getting that organized, it was the State Department project, I saw something there that was suspicious. In other words, the few children getting the most protein had a higher risk for liver cancer. And then there was a study in India documenting more or less the same thing, except those researchers didn't believe their own work. Higher animal protein consumption turned on that cancer, activated it, caused the genes to be expressed, as we say. And so I came home and got a grant from the National Institutes of Health and then continued more or less for the next 4 decades, where we explored this question. Is it true that animal protein really turns on cancer? Is it true that animal protein increases cholesterol and heart disease? I had a big research program, lots of students, continued funding, and sure enough, animal protein turns on cancer, period.
Based on your research, do you believe that plant protein is protective against cancer, or is neutral, or do you have an opinion?
Yeah, well, the best I can say is that the plant protein does not turn on cancer, number one. But in addition, when we're consuming those plants, they're loaded with all kinds of good things, antioxidants and complex carbohydrates and vitamins and minerals, etc. And so when we consume plants, we're getting a good protein that's not turning on cancer.
IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, is a cancer-promoting growth hormone produced by your liver when, particularly, we eat animal protein. So we can decrease IGF-1 levels by decreasing our animal protein intake. This was a really fascinating series of so-called ex vivo studies done by Pritikin's group, which showed that you take people before and after 2 weeks of eating healthy plant-based living plus walking, exercise, and you take their blood before and after, drip it on cancer cells growing in a petri dish, and you can significantly boost their blood's ability, boost their cancer defenses within 2 weeks of eating healthy, significantly kill off more cancer. Your blood just gets that much better at kicking cancer's butt after 2 weeks. I mean, how is that possible? What is going on? IGF-1. The reason we know that is because you add back to that petri dish the amount of IGF-1 you banished from your system because you stopped eating animal protein. Oh, cancer comes right back. You lose the cancer benefit. And so that's how, and so you can do that with men in prostate cancer, you can do that with women in breast cancer. And so that's one of the ways that plant-based diet increases our defenses by decreasing risk of this cancer-promoting growth hormone.
While it's true that all animal products appear to increase cancer risk, there's one type of animal product that virtually all the world's leading health authorities agree is a type 1 carcinogen, which puts it in the same category as cigarettes. Tragically, 2 of our most common foods are in that category: hot dogs and bacon.
When we list all of the foods and the ones that really are associated with disease, I'm going to put as public enemy number 1 this group called processed meats. That's bacon and sausage and ham and pastrami and those kinds of things. They are strongly linked to particularly colorectal cancer, but they're also linked to other forms of cancer like breast cancer. And this is not just a link, it's a definitive. The World Health Organization says we are as sure that processed meats cause colorectal cancer as we are sure that tobacco causes lung cancer, no question. But what is an open question is why. There are a lot of different carcinogens. Which one is the responsible actor? To this day, people debate that. With processed meats, is it that some of them have nitrates in them? Some of them are smoked. Some of them are cured in other ways. We don't really know which is the bad actor. We just know that it is such a clearly demonstrable phenomenon that we really want to avoid these. But here is what troubles me. I go into a hospital and I'm looking in the cafeteria to what they're serving to the patients and the staff and the visitors. And if you go there at 8 in the morning, you're going to see a big tub of bacon, right next to it a big tub of sausage. You think, wait a minute, we need this hospital to be a bit of a teachable moment for people that you can't smoke in here because it's a hospital. We should also have the hospital model healthy food.
Red meat and processed meat are absolutely carcinogenic. The IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, in 2015 kind of put the lid on all processed meats. So some people might call it friendly names like sausage and hot dog and pastrami, but the IARC calls it deadly. So group 1, carcinogens, same list, same certainty as asbestos and tobacco and plutonium comes your processed meat, which I will interject, includes your organic sliced turkey breast from the deli cabinet. I did not know that until I was writing my book. And I think I had my children living off of organic turkey slices in a pinch, thinking that was like a healthy, lean protein choice. Now, red meat is put as a group 2 carcinogen, is probably carcinogenic to humans. We know that it's definitely tied to colon cancer and heart disease. What's going on? We've talked about how the consumption of all animal protein elevates IGF-1, and that's a big part of what's going on. But what's in red meat is also going on inside of you. We've got heme iron and nitrosamine compounds, fat, of course, trans fat, saturated fat, cholesterol. And what's not in the meat? We don't have vitamins like A, D, E, and K. We don't have any fiber, which is one of my favorite things. And there's other minerals, there's no water. There's a lot lacking in meat. Then you're probably not having steak tartare as your red meat of choice. In other words, you're cooking it. And when you do, you get heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are highly carcinogenic inside your body, flying around, creating things. The carnitine in meat is digested by your little bacteria in your gut, ultimately into something called TMAO, trimethylamine N oxide. Highly, highly correlated to elevating cancer risk, colon, prostate, chronic kidney disease, cardiovascular disease. So have I said enough? Meat's bad. But of all the things that are bad about meat, I think because of my breast cancer hyperfocus, zeranol has to be the worst thing about meat. So all conventionally raised cattle have zeranol shoved behind their ear to make them grow fat fast. Zeranol is the most potent synthetic estrogen lookalike ever created. And so what? So what if you eat a little bit of zeranol? Well, in 1981, let's date that, little boys and girls in Milan, Italy were suddenly sprouting breasts between the ages of 3 and 10. And the EEC, now the EU, identified the zeranol in meat as the probable culprit. And in 1989, they literally they stopped using it right away, but in 1989, they banned the importation of all meat from the US and Canada because to this day, we still use zeranol. Why don't we go to New Jersey and examine the urine of little girls between 10 and 12 years old? 78.5% of them will have zeranol in their urine. There was the Nurses' Health study that looked at adolescent meat consumption and then premenopausal breast cancer incidence and found a 38% increase in breast cancer for those consuming the most red meat in adolescents.
So there's a lot of controversy about meat. Some people still, in fact, in 2019, the Annals of Internal Medicine published a study, a meta-analysis, in fact, that seemed to conclude that red meat was not harmful and perhaps even was beneficial. What's your take on that?
When your favorite news anchor like blares out, "Great news! Eat meat to your heart's content. It's not so bad for you." You take notice, especially if you're chomping on some bacon while you're getting ready for work. So what's happening here? In 2019, there was a meta-analysis of 14 studies that had the panel concluding, the panel, by the way, who has no names, just this guy named Johnston, who said, this study of 14 studies says, you know, eating red meat and processed meat really doesn't matter. Go ahead, keep eating it. Really? Because when I look at that exact same meta-analysis that you looked at, Mr. Johnston, I see that there is an 11% increase in cancer and a 14% increase in cardiovascular mortality for those who are eating red and processed meat. So how's your conclusion to eat more of it with abandon? Oh, I see. It even states. It's because you probably aren't going to be persuaded by percentages like 11% and 14% drop to change your addicted habits. That's insulting. Just give me the data and I'll decide if a 14% decreased chance of dying from a heart attack is worth putting my hamburger down and picking up a lentil burger instead.
Processed meat, bacon, ham, hot dogs, lunch meat, etc., is a known human carcinogen, a category 1 as opposed to category 2 carcinogen, meaning we know for certain that it increases cancer risk in people, just like plutonium and asbestos and tobacco smoke, etc. And so there's about an 18% increased risk in colorectal cancer risk, which is the leading cancer killer after lung cancer. But if you don't smoke, it is your leading cancer killer. So about 18% increase for 50 grams consumption. So that's like one sausage link or like a few small slices of bologna or something. You do that every day. And so that's approximately the increase in risk for lung cancer you get living in a home with smokers. The secondhand smoke of just, smoking around your kids increases the risk of lung cancer by about that same amount. So if you would not imagine blowing smoke in your kid's face, you should not imagine sending them to school with Lunchables or some bologna sandwich.
What about fried foods? Are they a concern for increasing risk of cancer too?
Fried foods. And I hear you groaning. I mean, like, oh, they're so delicious with the French fries and even fried zucchini and fried artichoke. Like the second word is healthy. The zucchini was healthy. The fried part, not so much. And that's because the way you make the frying happen is by dipping the entire otherwise healthy vegetable into a vat of extremely inflammatory oils with a bunch of, unbleached wheat flour. You're just coming up with this coated carcinogen, basically, because you're going to be consuming very inflammatory fats. The main driver toward all of our diseases is this underlying chronic inflammation, and fatty foods are just top of the list for causing it. That's why we call it whole food plant-based eating. Plant-based eating can still have a whole host of very difficult diseases connected to it if your choices are constantly highly processed and laden with a lot of fats and oils and enriched wheat flours and cookies, cakes, pastas, pastries. These are all available to you in plant-based form, but they're not healthy.
I think most researchers in the field think acrylamides are a mild carcinogen because they don't seem to be that dangerous in low amounts, but higher amounts. I think the International Association of Cancer Research now considers acrylamides a probable or possible carcinogen. Most people consider acrylamides are something that's going to be shown more in the future to be a mild carcinogen, especially in excessive amounts. And acrylamides are formed when you cook carbohydrate at high temperature or you barbecue animal products, you form more acrylamides, but just French fries and potato chips and corn flakes and cold cereals and coffee, brown, things that are darkened or browned or blackened, like black coffee and black tea have acrylamides in them. So we're recognizing not to overcook foods, mostly use water-based cooking methods.
We've seen that our food choices may increase our risk of cancer. And we've heard about class 1 and class 2 carcinogens, which is a categorization based on how sure we are that a particular substance increases cancer risk. And we've heard that some of the most common foods, including hot dogs, bacon, French fries, and red meat, all raise cancer risk.
I know a lot of people who throw up their hands and they say everything causes cancer, so I might just as well enjoy my life and take my chances.
Yeah.
And I see their point. Most people don't want to live longer if they aren't going to enjoy their lives. But at the same time, most people I know who've gotten cancer would agree that getting cancer is pretty miserable. So we each need to do our own cost-benefit analysis to decide what lifestyle habits cost us and what changing them might be worth to us. What's the truth about how much control we have over our risk of cancer?
Or is all this talk about meat and French fries small potatoes? Is early detection and the ability to treat with radiation and chemo and surgery the only approach that really truly makes a meaningful difference?
As the current diagnosis and treatment of breast cancer goes, it's all about early diagnosis because hopefully you're finding a more curable earlier stage cancer, although biology trumps stage. Like it can be a very aggressive stage 1 and already be out there in the bloodstream. And so all of our efforts with current cancer strategy are early detection, and then once we find that, let's analyze it and treat it. Surgery, radiation, chemo, anti-hormone therapy, biologic targeted agents, immunotherapy, Herceptin for HER2-driven tumors. And that's where it usually ends. After my epiphany about how powerful diet and lifestyle can be, for those patients already diagnosed, I get to add two huge weapons through diet and lifestyle changes. But those two weapons I'm using on the back end, if promoted through education and all the tools people need with resources and community to implement on the front end, really propel health and disease and cancer prevention. And that's where lifestyle medicine comes in. It can be used to treat and help prevent maybe recurrence, but its real power is on the front end to prevent bad things from ever having happened. You know, when we look at what can cause breast cancer, there are factors that are under our control and those that are not. But it's important to get a handle on what is not under your control to incentivize and encourage you to really fully embrace the things you can control. So what's over here in the uncontrollable? Certainly gene mutations, but BRCA, PALB2, CHEK2, these mutations that you inherit from mom or dad account for only 5 to 10% of all breast cancer. Other things you can do nothing about are being a woman, getting older, the race which you were born with. So African Americans have actually slightly less cancer than white women, but a 41% increase in death from breast cancer across all stages, which has multifactorial reasons, but that's something you can't do anything about, is your ethnicity. When you start having periods, and to a large extent when you stop having periods, are not under your control. The longer the window that your body, your breasts are exposed to cyclical estrogens of your monthly menstrual cycle, the higher your risk of breast cancer. Again, not really under your control when you have your first full-term pregnancy. So I'm not going to advocate for teenage pregnancy in the name of reducing breast cancer risk, but it turns out that if you have your pregnancies in your 20s, you have reduced risk for breast cancer as opposed to having your first baby at 30 or older. Family history, which kind of ties into some of the genetic mutations, and your own personal history of, say, marker lesions, precancerous biopsies. All of these things elevate breast cancer risk to variable degrees. But so does childhood nutrition. Again, probably not really under your control. And it turns out that that's tied to socioeconomic status, bone density, breast density, and height. So if anybody out there is under 5'2" and thought that being vertically challenged was a bad thing, it's breast cancer protective. So those are things you can't control for the most part. What can you control when it comes to breast cancer? Oh, so much. But the main things, the boulders on the scale pushing you toward cancer rather than away, and every day you can choose about these things, are what you eat. So eating animal protein and animal fat will tip it towards the bad, plants toward the good. Exercise, being sedentary is bad, putting some little pep in your step and getting 5 hours a week, if you're able to carry on a conversation, 2.5 hours a week with vigorous exercise. Another boulder. Alcohol. Really, alcohol is a carcinogen. So the less you drink, the better it is. So there's no like alcohol on the good side. Just don't drink alcohol. And finally, being overweight or obese is a huge, heavy boulder, no pun intended, on our scale pushing toward cancer. Pebbles, things that if you have a boulder, these can tip scales, but the boulder's already weighing you down. Environmental toxicities, emotional stress, and hormone replacement therapy.
We did a study with Craig Venter, who was among the first to decode the human genome. And we found that in just 3 months, over 500 genes were changed. In effect, turning on the good genes, turning off the bad genes, particularly downregulating what are called the oncogenes, which means are cancer-causing genes, the ones that tend to promote prostate, breast, and colon cancer. Strictly speaking, you're not changing the gene, but you're changing the expression of the gene. In other words, there's switches that turn these genes off and on. Things like methylation or histone and non-histone proteins and so on, or sirtuins and so on. And so if you can turn off a gene that causes cancer, it's as though you've changed that gene. A certain number of men who have biopsy-proven prostate cancer elect not to be treated with surgery or radiation right away, so-called, used to be called watchful waiting, now called active surveillance, because, the studies have shown that the most common form of cancer, the 90% get, that's not so aggressive, you're more likely to die with it than from it. There's a tendency, just get it out of me, before it spreads. But sometimes the treatment can be bad in and of itself. It can, in many patients, cause impotence or incontinence or both. So why would you want to have those kind of horrible side effects if you don't need to. So some visionary oncologists urologists like Dr. Peter Carroll at UCSF and the late Dr. Bill Fair, who was chair of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Dr. Carroll's chair at UCSF, realized that not everybody needs to have treatment right away, and that you can look at things, their Gleason score, their genetic profiling, how quickly their PSAs are going up, and so on, and really identify. Dr. Carroll is one of the best and busiest surgeons on the planet, but also has the largest group of men doing active surveillance, and they monitor them carefully, and so that if they start to get worse, then they might do the surgery. All of which is to say that we could then choose men who had biopsy-proven prostate cancer, who had elected not to undergo conventional treatment with surgery or radiation or chemo, randomly assign them into two groups. One group put them through the lifestyle program, the other group just do whatever they wanted, and then compare them. And it's very rare in biopsy-proven cancer that you have a non-intervention control group. They're usually getting chemo or radiation or surgery, and so it's hard to assess the value of the lifestyle changes alone. But in this case, because they were not getting those treatments, we could look at that. And we found that the PSA levels, a marker for prostate cancer, went up or got worse in the control group, went down or got better in the experimental group. The differences were directly proportional to the degree of lifestyle change they made. We sent their serum to Dr. Bill Aronson's lab at UCLA, where they have a standard line of prostate tumor cells growing in tissue culture. And we found that when we added the serum of the patients who made these lifestyle changes, the tumor growth was inhibited 70% versus only 9% in the control group. And none of the experimental group patients needed surgery or radiation or chemo in the first year, but 6 of the control group patients did, of the 93 men that were in the study. So this was the first, and as far as I know, still the only randomized controlled trial showing that lifestyle changes alone may slow, stop, or even reverse the progression of men with early-stage prostate cancer. Now, there is a subset of men who have very aggressive disease. They clearly need to have surgery and radiation. And I just want to emphasize that people sometimes get into this binary thinking, that lifestyle is good, drugs and surgery are bad, and we've all benefited from drugs and surgery. Properly used, they can be life-saving. And sometimes the combination can be best of all. But many people can avoid these procedures, whether it's a stent or a bypass or a radical prostatectomy or whatever, if they are under the right supervision and if they're selected properly to rule out the people who have the most aggressive forms of the disease.
So, 2 of the most common cancers, breast cancer and prostate cancer, seem to respond really well much of the time when we change our eating patterns for the better. But what does the most anti-cancer diet look like specifically? Breast surgeon Dr. Christy Funk thought she was eating a super anti-cancer diet. But when she set out to write a book about the topic, she dug deeply into the research, and her views, as well as her eating habits, changed.
So as I dove into the nutritional science to prove that everything I was saying about basically the way I ate, which was Mediterranean diet, lots of chicken, turkey, fish, tons of fruits and veggies, but the meats were there, feta on my salads, etc. I began to uncover the truth, right? The realization that, wow, the cellular response to all animal protein and animal fat consumption is really deleterious, really cancer-causing, really diabetogenic, obesity-genic. Like, it's going to hit all of our major killers. And I need to rethink this entire paradigm of, no, it's predominantly diet and lifestyle behaviors. So I had that big epiphany in the middle of writing my book and made an about face, became entirely plant-based in a day, along with my 3 sons and husband, and it's transformed my practice. I'm now able to empower women on the front end before a diagnosis, during a diagnosis, and after a diagnosis of breast cancer with really actionable things they can be doing. Every time they lift fork to mouth, they can be staving off an occurrence, recurrence, or death from breast cancer.
So the same diet that's used to prevent cancer is the same diet used to treat the cancer. And what is that diet? They have a few components, and that is eat more fruits and vegetables. What does that mean? Well, we know what fruit is. What is a vegetable? A vegetable is every other part of a plant that's not the fruit. So there's root vegetables, stem vegetables, leaf vegetables. So it's basically, saying eat more fruits and vegetables, which is the most uncontroversial statement in all of nutrition, is equivalent to saying eat more plants. And so that's what the American Institute for Cancer Research was kind of like the most prestigious body for diet and cancer connections. And so eat more fruits and vegetables, and other whole healthy plant foods, decrease meat intake, and decrease processed food intake, decrease alcohol intake, and then maintain a healthy weight, which is diet-related as well. And so that's basically what they consider an anti-cancer diet. And there are specific foods for specific cancers. If you have a particular family history of particular cancer, you can type in kidney cancer into nutritionfacts.org and talk about the foods that have been used, to try to randomize survivors to different foods and see if they live longer or shorter. And if it helps somebody with the cancer live significantly longer, you would presume that would help prevent the cancer in the first place.
I have this term GBOMBS, which stands for GBOMBS, which is an acronym, so people can remember these 6 foods that powerfully fight cancer. So they stand for greens, particularly green cruciferous vegetables, which have so much ability to fight cancer. And I'm saying there's studies on all these foods. Greens, beans, or even in the Nurses' Health Study, just 2 servings of beans a week reduce risk of breast cancer by about 25%. But daily consumption of beans has dramatic effects in reducing cancer. Onions reduce risk of cancer in major studies by 50 to 88% reduction of different cancers based on how much onions people are eating. And berries shocked the researchers who were doing the studies to actually a reversal of precancerous and cancerous tissue. So we're talking here about, and even seeds and mushrooms, we're talking about tremendous power of mushrooms to fight cancer. And we have this opportunity to a variety of different types of mushrooms in our diet. So I'm trying to encourage people to keep these foods on the tip of their tongue. But yeah, so people love that GBOMBS because I can spend time by explaining the beauty of mushrooms and how, and how there's like on our cells, there are receptors to accept the ergothioneine in mushrooms that then stabilize our DNA, and how mushrooms affect the ability of the immune system to recognize abnormal cells before they can become cancerous. That it's almost as if our body was built with the machinery to benefit from mushrooms, to mushroom ingredients, demonstrating how critical some of these foods were in the development of the human species, because our immune system is really dependent on these foods for maximum function.
One of the more controversial foods in the human diet is soy. Some people say it causes cancer. Others say it reduces cancer risk. So, what's the truth about soy?
Without any dispute whatsoever, soy is helpful in men, in women, in children. Soy is an absolute superfood, and particularly so when it comes to breast cancer. So why was it so vilified? Why did I vilify it? For 18 years as a breast cancer surgeon, told every single patient, spit that miso out of your mouth. It's a phytoestrogen. It is a plant-based estrogen. Do you think that the estrogen receptors on a breast cancer cell have discriminating taste? Like, oh, that comes from tofu. You're fine, but that comes from your ovary. You're bad. No, it's just a key fitting a lock, turning it on. When I finally dove into soy science in 2017 to truly explain this with research to my patients and the community at large through my book, I was like, oh wow, I get it now. There are actually 2 receptors for estrogen, alpha and beta. Alpha is on the cancer cells, but beta, with 1,600% more affinity, the isoflavones such as genistein and daidzein in soy hit beta. And what they do there is phenomenal. First of all, they shut alpha down. And second of all, they go out into the peripheral fat where there is that enzyme aromatase converting steroids into estrogen, and that shuts aromatase down. So if all this is actually true, then human studies evaluating high versus low soy consumption should truly show a decrease in breast cancer occurring. And once you have it, should you stay away from it then? No. Soy shows a decrease in recurrence and in death. And interestingly, all of the human studies ever done, which really didn't pour in until 2009 and beyond, always show between a 30 and 60% reduction in all of those things. Kind of squarely landing, though, repeatedly on the number 32%. 32%. I see it in a lot of studies. The fact that soy is a superfood really needs to be preached loud and clear because it's been so wrongfully vilified. The most healthful types of soy are always going to be organic and or non-GMO. The most healthful types of soy are going to be largely pesticide and herbicide free. So we want to choose organic whenever possible. But it all comes down to the power of the isoflavones. So you don't want them diluted. You're going to get, for every gram of soy protein that you're getting from whole or minimally processed foods, so I'm talking tempeh, miso, natto, those are your fermented soys along with tamari.
Let's talk about cruciferous vegetables and cancer.
I get so excited when I think about broccoli. Cruciferous vegetables have such power in the plant-based chemicals, right? You just chew and swallow, but these chemicals, these nutrients, get into your bloodstream and exert powers on your behalf. One of the most powerful of them all is an isothiocyanate called sulforaphane, which is mostly found in your cruciferous family and is most predominantly found in broccoli and 100 times more sulforaphane in broccoli sprouts. And what these sulforaphanes do is seek out and destroy cancer cells. They decrease proliferation and metastases. The other superpower in our cruciferous family is in indole-3-carbinol, which excretes excess estrogen out the urinary door. So estrogen, being associated with elevated cancer risk, is decreased. How much? There was a really good study following 52,000 African American women and found that those who consumed simply one serving a day of cruciferous vegetables, particularly, had 41% less premenopausal breast cancer, which is pretty astounding just coming from your lowly broccoli.
One of the most potent anti-cancer compounds turns out to be lignans. What are lignans, and why are they important for cancer prevention?
Lignans are also phytoestrogens, and flax seeds have 100 times the lignin content of pretty much any other plant food. Sesame seeds come in number 2. So what are lignans doing? They are decreasing estrogen levels and they're slowing cancer growth. The fact that lignans in flax and lignans in sesame seeds and some cruciferous vegetables and whole grains can decrease the proliferation rates and increase the cancer suicide rates in breast cells absolutely translates to all cells, because the lignans aren't just like zeroing in on the breast organ. It's traveling throughout your whole system and is going to have a systemic response with all of those benefits. The best source of lignans is definitely ground flax seeds, ground being key. If you eat them intact, your body's just gonna poop it out. Can't break down that whole. Next in line are sesame seeds, then you get some cashew nuts thrown in there. Whole grains have lignans, rye, barley, oats. So do cruciferous vegetables. So there they are again, the Braceraceae family winning out with broccoli and kale. Some fruits have it, particularly apricots and strawberries. You're also going to have your beans. White beans have the most, mung beans, soybeans. But the thing is, the vast majority of these foods, for example, a cup of broccoli has 0.6 milligrams of lignans, whereas just 2 tablespoons of ground flax has 85 milligrams. So if you really want to make sure you're getting that daily lignan dose, just throw a little flax or some sesame seeds into a salad dressing, or I put it always into either an antioxidant smoothie or oatmeal.
I grind flax seeds every few days in a coffee grinder that I have dedicated to this purpose. I eat them freshly ground almost every day, and in addition to lignans, there are other substances that are found in foods like flax seeds that also can be hugely beneficial in preventing and fighting cancer. For example, fiber.
When I was growing up, I thought fiber, my mom's orange Metamucil, and a good old bowel movement. End of fiber story. Somewhere in my medical school training, I heard that fiber fed bacteria in your gut and also make you poop. Like, end of story. Like, it was a 1-sentence tutorial. Now, we're learning so much more. Really, I feel like every day a new article comes out on the benefits of fiber, which basically, from a breast cancer standpoint, fiber binds estrogen and other toxins in your GI tract and makes you poop them out. There is a single study that shows that women who consume 30 grams of fiber daily have a 40% drop in breast cancer. I'd like high consumption to always be 30 grams or more versus less than that, and I think you would see the true power of fiber. Berries have ellagic acid in them, which is a known cause of apoptosis, making cancers commit suicide, decreasing angiogenesis, and actually just messing up cancer cell signals. So the crosstalk is like, hey, what happened? Cancer doesn't get its oncogenes turned off and on in the way it wants, which is good for us humans. In a 20-year study of over 93,000 women who consumed the highest versus lowest number of blueberries, they had the least cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. A 2020 study looking specifically at breast cancer and blueberries showed that 2 cups a week of blueberries drop breast cancer by 25%. But interestingly, consuming juice, in particular orange and apple juice, increased breast cancer by 33%. That's so interesting because, for example, apple juice comes from apples. Can an apple a day keep the doctor away? I think so. One study showed that there's a 24% drop in breast cancer for those who do eat an apple a day. But the procyanidins, the magic, is largely found in the skin of apples. And therefore, if you juice the apple, you're losing a lot of the power and you're just creating a sugar bomb that elevates insulin and elevates glucose, and that becomes your cascade of inflammation. So eat apples, but in their whole food form, or maybe blended in a smoothie, but no apple pie and no apple juice. Turmeric is best known as an Indian spice, right? But that may actually be the reason why our Indian sisters have 5 times less breast cancer than we do in the US. Turmeric is so powerful as an anti-inflammatory. However, it's not inactive, but it really needs to be potentiated by 2 things. By the piperine in pepper, which makes it 1,600% more bioavailable, and by fat. So whenever you have your turmeric, you want to make sure it's accompanied by a healthy fat, like a little bit of avocado or an olive, or some flax seeds if we're mixing up a dressing. Flax seeds, turmeric, I make a mean dressing with those.
One of the things we're hearing over and over again from our health experts is that there are common underlying causes of health and disease, and that the body is not just a collection of separate organs, but is a holistic and integrated system.
And that's really good news because it means we don't have to choose whether to eat a heart-healthy diet or a brain-healthy diet or an anti-cancer diet, because our bodies are designed to eat certain foods. This means when we give them the right fuel, every organ, every system, every cell in our bodies can benefit.
This episode is about cancer and diabetes. And the reason we chose to combine them into one episode is that they are actually profoundly connected.
Rates of type 2 diabetes have been going up fast. And the bad news is, if you get type 2 diabetes, your odds of getting cancer increase significantly. There's a documented correlation between type 2 diabetes and increased risk of cancers of the liver and pancreas, as well as colorectal, bladder, breast, and endometrial cancer.
So if you want to steer clear of cancer, you're also going to want to do your best to avoid type 2 diabetes.
So what is diabetes? Or more accurately, what are the various types of diabetes? What do they have in common? And what are their differences? And most importantly, what can you do to protect yourself and your loved ones?
Diabetes is something I'm passionate about. There are the types of diabetes that we hear about most often are type 1 and type 2. And type 1 diabetes is really an autoimmune disease, and it's a disease that where the body attacks its own beta cells of the pancreas, which is the cells that produce insulin. And so there is either a complete lack of or a minimal production of insulin in these people, and it happens during childhood or adolescence normally, and it means insulin injections for life. And so that is an autoimmune disease. It's less diet related than type 2. 90% of diabetes cases are type 2. This is a disease really of diet and lifestyle. It's a disease of underactivity and overconsumption, essentially. Certainly there is a genetic component, and some people are just at higher risk because their beta cells don't function quite as well, or they are really good at storing fat, or their insulin receptor sites aren't quite as efficient, or whatever the case may be. They're at higher risk, but almost always it's diet and lifestyle that really pulls the trigger on them that causes the disease. And so type 2 diabetes it's exciting because you're in greater control. The results when you change your diet and lifestyle are dramatic. You can halt, you can even in many cases reverse type 2 diabetes. So that's the second type of diabetes. And then there's also something called LADA, which is latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. And LADA is really a lot like type 1, but it's often misdiagnosed as type 2 because it happens in adults. And what it really is it's like a slow progressing type 1. It's an autoimmune disease that's destroying your beta cells, but it's doing so much more slowly than it does in childhood. And so for people with LATA, sometimes it takes 2 to 3 years before their beta cells are gone and they need insulin. Sometimes it happens more quickly, but it's another type of diabetes that we need to be aware of. And then the other type we might mention is prediabetes. And prediabetes is really a condition in which your blood glucose levels are above normal, but they're not quite high enough to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So your blood glucose might be between 100 and 125 milligrams per deciliter. They're elevated, it's doing damage to your body, it's not good, you want to do something about it. It's easier to reverse prediabetes than it is to reverse type 2 diabetes. It is a disease of insulin resistance. So you're producing insulin, but the insulin is not doing its job.
So over the course of time, the number of different flavors of diabetes, if you will, has increased and become a little bit more complex. So traditionally, people think of diabetes as having two different flavors. You have type 1 and you have type 2. Type 1 happens to young people, type 2 happens to old people, and that's canonically what people generally think. But over the course of time, the definitions have gotten a little bit more complex, and the number of different types of diabetes has also increased. So in today's world, you have type 1, type 1.5 diabetes, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes, and now type 3 diabetes, which is considered dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So there's 6 different flavors, if you will. And as a result of that, it's gotten a little bit more confusing as to what type of diabetes anybody's living with. Type 3 diabetes is a new form of diabetes that is being discovered and researched heavily in the world of brain health. And the reason for that is because researchers have discovered that people who develop dementia and progress towards Alzheimer's disease are living with a form of insulin resistance that affects their brain. And so insulin resistance is generally thought about as being a condition that affects only your liver and muscle tissue. But now researchers are finding that it actually can negatively impact your brain, lead to cognitive decline, and set the stage for both dementia and Alzheimer's disease into the future.
Gestational diabetes is caused by insulin resistance. But it's an insulin resistance that tends to go away when the pregnancy is over. However, the concern about gestational diabetes is that women with gestational diabetes have 7 times the risk of getting gestational diabetes in the future, and I think about 4-fold increase of just type 2 diabetes in the future. So it is a major problem.
The difficult part of gestational diabetes is that most women think that it's a temporary form of diabetes that just happens when they're pregnant and then it goes away as soon as they deliver. And even though that may be true for the majority of women, it turns out that gestational diabetes indicates that, number one, a woman was likely insulin resistant prior to being pregnant. Secondarily, even if gestational diabetes does happen to go away when she delivers her baby, both the baby is at an increased risk for chronic disease and the mother is at as much of a 65% increased risk for the development of type 2 diabetes in the future. So gestational diabetes is really just a warning sign, and women should take that very seriously.
About 10% of all Americans today have type 2 diabetes, and the numbers are rising at an alarming rate. Hundreds of millions of people worldwide now have prediabetes. What is prediabetes, and why is it important?
Prediabetes is actually the most prevalent form of diabetes in our world today. There are more people living with prediabetes than there are with any other form of diabetes, and the numbers are staggering. In the United States alone, there's approximately 350 million people. Of those 350 million people, 115 million of them are living with some form of glucose metabolism disorder. And of those 115 million people, 85 million of those people are living with prediabetes. Most of them don't even know. So the overwhelming majority of those who have glucose metabolism disorders are those that are living with prediabetes. And most of those people are even unaware because they haven't gone to the doctor recently, or they haven't elevated it to becoming an actual problem which they're trying to solve.
About 9 out of every 10 diabetes cases are type 2. And for a long time, most scientists thought that type 2 diabetes was caused by too much sugar. That kind of made sense since the main symptom of the disease is excessive sugar in the blood.
But is too much sugar in the blood the core problem, or is it a symptom? We now know that the underlying cause of most cases of type 2 diabetes is what's known as insulin resistance. What is insulin resistance, and how is it connected to diabetes and other metabolic diseases?
Insulin resistance, one of my favorite topics to talk about because I think that's the hidden epidemic that most people aren't addressing. Metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. So insulin resistance can occur before the diagnosis of metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is a diagnosis that includes insulin resistance, which is the cells just can't really recognize the signal of insulin to say, get the nutrients into the cell. It also includes some lipid problems, so maybe high cholesterol, high triglycerides, low HDLs, high LDLs. It also includes high blood pressure. So it's kind of like the right before you get to be diabetic condition. Insulin resistance can be going on for many years before that. And in my world, the insulin resistance itself causes some of those horrific downsides of being diabetic, yet people aren't aware that they have it until usually it's too late and some of the damage has been done.
Why is insulin resistance so harmful? What happens to us when it's not dealt with?
There's a significant toll that is taken on the human body when living in an insulin-resistant state, regardless of whether you're just insulin-resistant or whether it has progressed to prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. But living in any one of those three states can significantly increase your risk for what is called all-cause mortality, ACM. And studies demonstrate conclusively that the higher your level of insulin resistance, the higher your average blood glucose value, the more insulin that circulates in your blood at all time, the higher your risk for specifically, number one, heart disease, number two, the higher your risk for fatty liver disease, and number three, the higher your risk for chronic kidney disease. So all three of these conditions can become significantly problematic over the course of time, and it all starts with the insulin resistant state, which leads to high blood glucose and high insulin. A fascinating study that was performed back in the 1990s demonstrated that in order to predict who is likely to develop heart disease into the future, the single most important metric is to determine someone's circulating insulin level in their blood today. And people who have higher circulating insulin levels in today's world are at a significantly increased risk for a cardiac event into the future. So it goes to say that even if you haven't been diagnosed with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, having a blood glucose metabolism disorder is just a warning sign that sets the stage for a significantly increased risk for many chronic diseases. Another thing that can happen when living with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes in an insulin-resistant state is that there are a number of ancillary conditions that can spin out of control relatively quickly. Number one is called peripheral neuropathy, which is nerve tingling, and people get that in their hands and their fingers and their toes, and it feels like they're walking on glass. This can progress to a point where it's very challenging to use your limbs on a daily basis. In addition to that, people who are living with insulin resistance, prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes end up with retinopathy that can then progress to blindness. In addition to that, people who are living with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes end up at a significantly increased risk for limb amputation due to poor circulation in their extremities. And so the cost to human life is very significant. And whether we're talking about one organ that ends up becoming dysfunctional or a constellation of organs that become dysfunctional, blood glucose disorders are just a warning sign that future organ failure is likely to occur, and that can significantly decrease the amount of time that you spend on this planet.
So insulin resistance is an underlying cause of the most common types of diabetes and is causing huge problems to our health. Clearly, we need to know more about insulin resistance.
Insulin resistance is basically about your body not being able to process the insulin. So you actually have enough insulin in your system, but on a cellular level, your body can't take that insulin and process it. So there's this excess insulin floating around in your system. So that seems to be caused by this excess calories. so that people who have insulin resistance tend to be people who are overweight, tend to be people who have higher levels of simple carbs, higher levels of fat intake. There's also a genetic component, so there's no question that some people are more prone to type 2 diabetes. There's certain body types, certain ethnicities that are higher at risk. And there's sometimes sort of something between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes where people have a little issue with insulin production, but they also have an issue with insulin resistance as well.
When it comes to diet and insulin resistance, there's a lot of controversy. What are the foods that drive insulin resistance?
The foods that tend to drive insulin resistance are the foods that tend to bring in a lot of calories. And there's two basic categories. One basic category where calories come in easy. We call these empty calories because there's a lot of calories and not much nourishment, is simple carbs, simple carbohydrates. And people demean carbohydrates generally. Well, there's nothing wrong with carbohydrates. What's wrong is the processed carbohydrates or the simple carbohydrates. And those show up primarily in sugars as well as in flours, especially your processed white flours. So simple carbohydrates, sugars, and flours, that's one food category. The other food category that really brings in a lot of insulin resistance is fats. And fats show up in a variety of places. One of the most common sources of fat is actually dairy. A lot of people don't realize how much fat we get into our system through dairy. Another source is other animal products. Your any type of meat, whether it's red meat or white meat, those tend to be higher in fat. And then of course oils. Oils are a very high source of fat, and there's different types of fat and different types of oils, and that's a whole other discussion, but those are probably the three biggest sources of fat in our diets.
Now, prediabetes is actually caused by insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is a metabolic state that occurs when you consume a diet that contains too much dietary fat. Now, this is a controversial statement, not because the science presents it as a controversial statement, but because the general public doesn't generally want to believe that insulin resistance is caused by dietary fat. And so in the world of social media and in the world of YouTube and Instagram and beyond, there's a lot of unnecessary fighting and finger pointing about what actually causes insulin resistance. But if you go into the scientific literature and look at what the scientists have discovered, you will find that as far back as 1920, researchers discovered that a diet that contains significant quantities of dietary fat set the stage for high blood glucose. And so what I want people to understand is that even though the general public wants you to believe that the reason you developed prediabetes is simply because you ate too much sugar, the truth is that yes, eating sugar can certainly set the stage for glucose metabolism disorders, but an easier way to do it, a more repeatable way to do it, and the way that most people are actually diagnosed with prediabetes is simply because they're consuming too much fat, and in particular, saturated fat.
To me, the important thing is not as much the percent of calories from fat as the quality of the fat. When fat comes from whole foods, that fat tends to have positive impacts on health. When it comes from highly processed foods and animal products, not so much. It tends to have more negative impacts on health. And so some of the very high fat diets, like ketogenic diets, one of the things that happens when you eat a lot of fat is you're reducing your intake of the other macronutrients, which generally tends to be more the carbohydrates because protein tends to stay fairly level.
So the type of fat is important. What about saturated fat? Is saturated fat a concern with insulin resistance?
Eating saturated fat increases insulin resistance in your liver and your muscles. And what that leaves you with is elevated blood sugars. And if that continues for too long, you can go blind, you can lose your kidney function, you get lower limbs amputated, bad news all around. And so you can show this within days by randomizing people to a high saturated fat diet. You can show within hours of a single meal. In fact, you could, you don't have to feed anybody anyway. You actually use something called intralipid, where you just put fat straight in people's bloodstream. boom, you can do these special MRI scans to actually see insulin resistance just shoot up within an hour, right? But you don't have to put it through an IV, you put it through your mouth, same thing. And there's a third way. Have fat spilling over from your visceral fat stores. So if you have abdominal obesity, where where your belly is pushed out from this deep visceral fat that's infiltrating your inner organs, your liver, this kind of fat spills over into your bloodstream. So here you are, so you could be not eating any saturated fat and say, oh, why am my diabetes not getting better? Well, guess what's happening? You are effectively eating cheeseburgers every day because you have all this saturated fat spilling over from the old cheeseburgers that ended up in your middle. And so you end up with the same fat in your blood, and then you have the consequence that the insulin resistance. So what do? Stop eating saturated fat, and you lose your visceral fat, right? That deep abdominal belly fat. And so how do you do that? What's the way to do both at the same time? Whole food, plant-based diet, the most effective weight loss intervention ever published in the medical literature that didn't restrict calories or mandate exercise. Whole food, plant-based diet, right? So there you go, you get the best of both worlds. You're cutting down saturated fat intake, because whole food, plant-based, you're not eating processed junk, which is like tropical oils, like coconut oil and things like that, and you're not getting the meat and dairy, saturated fat. You're losing weight, and you lose the visceral fat first, which is great. And so then, dun-dun-dun, you don't have the fat in your blood. All of a sudden, your insulin can work again, and wait a second, then you eat an apple, your blood sugar go up and down just like normal, and poof, you're cured. What does cure mean? Cure means normal blood sugars on a normal diet, and ta-da! And the earlier you catch it, the better. I forget the stats, but within 8 years, I think you have a good chance of reversing. But after 8 years, I think it's actually less than 50% can be reversed at that stage. But of course, you want to try, and you can still improve your blood sugar control, etc.
Quite a few studies have looked at diabetes rates for people that eat according to different, relatively healthy dietary patterns. What do these studies tell us? And what do we know about the optimal dietary pattern for preventing and for reversing diabetes?
We've got a number of studies that have looked at diabetes rates of people that live similar healthy lifestyles but eat different dietary patterns. And in the Adventist Health Study too, the vegans had 62% less diabetes than the non-vegetarians. In the Taiwanese studies, 75% less in women, 50% less in men. In the Epic Oxford, I think it was 49% less in the vegans. So it's again very consistent and partly because it's lower body weights and people eating whole food plant-based diets. So these studies when they looked at different dietary patterns, they compared people eating vegan diets, lacto-ovo, pescatarian, in some cases semi-vegetarian and omnivorous. And the way that they define those is vegan is no animal products. But it doesn't, as you said, it doesn't necessarily mean you're eating a super healthy whole food plant-based diet. A whole food plant-based diet is really based on whole plant foods. So legumes and whole grains and vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds and not so many highly processed or refined foods. And so there is a huge difference. So, ideally, if you were doing a vegan diet, you want it to be more of a whole food plant-based vegan diet. But certainly, even people eating a vegan diet that is, sort of half and half, they're going to have not nearly the same kinds of benefits as a person eating a truly whole food plant-based diet.
I had to go out on my own to try and determine if there was a way that I could actually live a truly healthy life that could limit my risk for the development of future autoimmune conditions and make me feel like a normal person once again. So that's when I stumbled across this idea of eating a whole food plant-based diet back in the year 2003, when very few people were even talking about it. And it felt like I was sort of a soldier going out on my own, just trying to find a way to become healthier about myself. In the year 2003, I ended up switching over to eating a plant-based diet. And when I did, it felt like I took a charger, stuck it into a wall, and all of a sudden within 24 hours, I felt like I had a ton of energy back. That energy felt fantastic. I was less lethargic. I was more hydrated. I could sleep better. My blood glucose came down. My insulin use came down. But the interesting part was that I was seeing all these improvements in my metabolic health, but yet, from a dietary perspective, my carbohydrate intake had gone from about 100 grams of carbohydrate per day, upwards of 700 grams of carbohydrate per day. So I was effectively doing the exact opposite of what the traditional low carbohydrate standard of care had told me to do. And as a result of doing that, all of my biomarkers improved. My A1C came down, my blood glucose came down, my cholesterol came down, my blood pressure came down, and I felt significantly better. So that was 20 years ago. Since that time, I've gone on to educate myself to try and help as many people as possible.
Most doctors are trained to treat insulin resistance, prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes with drugs. But these drugs have real side effects, and they don't always work. The phrase, "an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure," was first said in 1736 by Benjamin Franklin. But it is as true today as it was when old Ben coined the phrase. So how does that apply to diabetes? Is there an anti-diabetes lifestyle that can prevent and sometimes even help to reverse these conditions?
When I was trained in conventional medicine, I was taught to treat a disease after it occurs. So if someone has diabetes, I was taught to give a pill for diabetes. If someone has high cholesterol, I was taught to give a pill for high cholesterol. So the analogy I use for this is the analogy of a tree. If you have a tree and the tree has some sick fruit on the branches, well, you can say, I'm just going to go up and cut off those branches. Or you can say, I'm going to look at the soil. And integrative medicine, lifestyle medicine, works within the soil. So if you have a health challenge, for example, we'll pick one. We'll say diabetes, which is a big one for many people today. So if you have that health challenge, I can give you 6 drugs you can take for your diabetes, or I can say, let's look at what you're eating. Let's look at your macronutrients. Let's look at your micronutrients. Let's make sure you're getting 7 hours of sleep and you don't have sleep apnea. Let's make sure you don't have toxins in your system. We know that pesticides and herbicides are linked to type 2 diabetes. And we also know that stress and tension raises cortisol, which is linked to diabetes. So now in my toolbox, instead of just having drugs in my toolbox, I have things like nutrition.
Where prediabetes is concerned, about 70% of people who have prediabetes will go on to develop full-blown type 2 diabetes. And generally it has a lot to do with their level of body fatness. And so when you're storing fat, especially in and around your vital organs, you're at higher risk. And so the more you're able to lose weight once you've been diagnosed with prediabetes, the better your chances are of never developing type 2 diabetes. And also your level of physical activity. There are such simple things you can do when you have prediabetes to prevent ever developing type 2. And the 2 are, number 1, eat a whole food plant-based diet, eat fewer calories, more food. You're eating, greater volumes of vegetables and fruits and legumes and less refined foods. Get rid of the highly processed foods. And the second is get active. Every time you eat, move your body. If you're consuming a meal, go for a walk. Do something, just don't sit down. And that will make a huge difference in preventing the development of type 2 diabetes. Vegetables have the highest nutrient density and the lowest energy or caloric density of foods. You can eat a lot and be consuming few calories. So they have the most nutrients per calorie. So they're super healthy foods. So you want to load up on veggies. The second thing is beans, legumes, lentils, and beans, because they're the most concentrated in fiber, and fiber is very protective against type 2 diabetes. So beans and greens, are very important foods. But beyond that, intact whole grains, or whole grains that are less processed, if you will. And then fruits are protective. In many people, this comes as a surprise, but people who eat more fruit have less type 2 diabetes. And nuts and seeds are very protective as well.
What about type 1 diabetes? Let's ask a health expert who's been thriving with type 1 for decades now. What's his secret?
So a simple way to think about type 1 diabetes is what most people living with type 1 diabetes want to accomplish is they want to minimize the amount of insulin that they're injecting on a daily basis. So their entire focus is to try and limit their insulin use, meaning that they have to inject themselves with a syringe or inject themselves using a pen or an insulin pump the fewest number of times possible, and to give themselves the smallest doses possible. And in order to accomplish that, what most people do is they end up eating a low carbohydrate diet, because eating a low carbohydrate diet ends up with significantly reducing your insulin use. So that is one way to get to a reduced insulin use. However, what most people are unaware of is that when you eat the exact opposite, which is a low fat diet, and you eliminate the insulin resistance metabolism that we talked about earlier, your insulin use comes down significantly. But the difference between the low carb approach and the low fat approach is that the research demonstrates that people who eat a low carbohydrate diet may use less insulin today, but in the future they're at a significantly increased risk for many other chronic diseases. People who eat a plant-based diet that contains a significant amount of whole plant foods use a small amount of insulin today and are at a significantly reduced risk for chronic diseases into the future.
Even though type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes are very different conditions, it turns out that the same basic dietary pattern can be helpful with both of them. And this same dietary pattern can also reduce your risk of cancer and many other painful, debilitating, and often deadly diseases.
One of our most fervent wishes for those we love is that they not suffer. When we hear about someone who died in a high-speed highway accident, we sometimes console ourselves with the notion that at least they went quickly and didn't suffer.
The two diseases that we focused on in this episode, cancer and diabetes, are both characterized typically by prolonged suffering. Cancer patients can waste away, racked by pain, weakened by the very medical inventions used to treat the disease. And diabetes can lead to much of the body shutting down, system by system, leading to neuropathy, blindness, amputation, and eventually to death.
Philosophers, theologians, and scientists have all tried to solve the problem of human suffering. I don't know if we'll ever eradicate it completely, but what if we put our energy into a more achievable goal, the elimination of needless suffering? Because as we've seen, a significant percentage of cancers and cases of diabetes can be prevented by switching to a whole foods, plant-based diet.
We've also seen that this same diet also lowers the risk of most other chronic diseases. But perhaps equally important, eating that way helps you to feel better right now. You don't have to wait years or decades to reap the benefits. When you feed your body the fuel that it needs, you can enjoy more energy, a clearer mind, deeper sleep, more balanced blood sugar, and you can add not just years to your life, but also life to your years.
It's so true. And one of the things we're learning today is that at the root of many of the major chronic conditions of our times is chronic inflammation. It might show up for some people as Alzheimer's and for others as an autoimmune condition like lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. It's also one of the primary drivers of cardiovascular disease.
In the next episode, we're going to look at what causes chronic inflammation, how your gut plays into it, and why a healthy microbiome is absolutely fundamental to a healthy life. We're going to look at autoimmune conditions, at digestion, and at how food can fuel or calm the inflammatory cycle.
It's time for a food revolution.
It's time for a food revolution.
It's time.
It's time.
It is time for a food revolution.
At Food Revolution Network, our mission is healthy, ethical, and sustainable food for everyone who eats. We want kids to learn about healthy food in school. We want doctors to learn how nutrition impacts health in medical school. We want the routine use of antibiotics banned from factory farms. We want a world where everyone, regardless of their ethnic or economic background, has knowledge of and access to healthy food for their family. We want a world in which heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, obesity, and diabetes are rare, and in which vibrant health is the status quo. We're spreading the word and standing for change. And with every empowerment package purchased, we make a donation to Trees for the Future, enabling them to plant an organic fruit or nut tree in a low-income community. Join this movement and support this mission. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing in that powerful episode. To express your opinions on what you've been hearing and to find out what other folks are saying, post and engage in the comment section on the broadcast page. Make sure you refresh the comments using the button provided there so you can see the most recent ones that have been submitted. Janine said, "Good morning, Ocean. Last year I was diagnosed with renal cell carcinoma and lost a kidney. My maternal grandparents both died from cancer, one at age 42. Both of my parents died of lung cancer. This terrifies me. I need all the ammunition to fight this. God bless you and everyone at FRN." Well, Janine, so sorry for the impact cancer has had in your family, and I'm so glad you're here with us. We're sending you lots of love and healing wishes and hope that what you are learning here will be helpful to you, as I believe it may be. Blessings and love to you every step of the way. And said, "I'm a 45-year survivor of breast cancer. My diet and lifestyle are not perfect, but since my surgery, I've been mostly vegetarian, then mostly vegan, then mostly whole foods plant-based. I believe this has made a difference." Thank you, Anne, for sharing that. Congratulations on 45 years. We wish you many more healthy years to come. And yes, I suspect you're right. Diet always does make a difference. We've heard from Annette, who said, "I have type 2 diabetes and my A1C is slowly going up over the years. I feel like I need to eat plants 100%. I keep falling off the wagon. I think I'm the kind of person that needs a sharp line, a clear boundary." Annette, thanks for sharing this. And yes, this is very common. A lot of people find that they do need those bright lines. And actually, the concept of bright line eating comes from Dr. Susan Pierce Thompson, one of my dear friends. In episode 6, you're going to hear a lot more from her about the psychology of eating and how we can make bright lines work to help us stick with healthy habits. So make sure you tune in for episode 6 where we dive into that more. The episode is titled Solving Obesity. And as you probably know, there's a big connection between diabetes and obesity. So tune in there. And you may want to check out her book, Bright Line Eating. If you're somebody who is struggling to implement a healthy diet and stick with it, and you keep feeling like junk foods and unhealthy foods, and especially sugary foods and processed foods have too much pull on you, and you're not really the author of your food life, then absolutely bright lines can be helpful and healthy habits can be helpful, and you may want to consider whether you're struggling with food addiction. Bright Line Eating is a book Susan wrote that really focuses on helping folks who are in that camp to get freedom from food addiction. So you may want to check that out. And also for everybody who is interested in going further with addressing type 2 diabetes in particular, you may want to check out the Tackling Type 2 Masterclass we created with dietitian Brenda Davis. If you go to type2.foodrevolution.org, you can sign up for that as well. And from there, after the masterclass, there's an invitation to join in a course that we created with Brenda that helps you implement all of that. These are some resources that may be helpful. Varner said, "Dr. Furman mentioned that coffee is something to avoid. Recently, I began to drink 1 cup of coffee per day based on the research that John Robbins shared on the health benefits of coffee. Would like some guidance on this issue. So grateful that the replay is available." Yes, Varner. Well, first of all, on the replay, you're absolutely right. Every episode is available on replay as part of the free summit experience for a day after we finish each broadcast until the next one begins. Hope you all are enjoying the replays, and you can go back and watch things a second time if you want to, or even a third time. Now, on the topic of coffee, not everybody is the same. Biochemical individuality is absolutely a thing. And just because studies show that something is good for most people most of the time, doesn't mean it's good for all people all the time, or that it's good for you right now. So listen to your body and see how you respond. And coffee is high in a compound known as caffeine. For some people, that's very pleasurable. For other people, that's very problematic. It can interfere with sleep. It can make them jittery. It can impact nervous system in unhealthy ways. So listen to your body and see how you respond. But let me also be clear about the research that we have. We have studies showing enormous health benefits from coffee. According to one study, consumption of coffee could cut mouth and throat cancer risk by 50%. Other studies have found that coffee reduces risk of many other types of cancer as well, including uterine, prostate, brain, colon, breast, liver, lung, and skin cancers. We have research on all of this. It's also been linked with decreased risk of type 2 diabetes. And for those who already have type 2 diabetes, coffee can prolong your life expectancy. One study of nearly 4,000 type 2 diabetics found that those who drank coffee were 30% more likely to still be alive after being tracked over the course of 20 years. And coffee turns out to be loaded with antioxidants, which help to prevent the damaging effects of oxidation on cells throughout your body. In fact, coffee is the #1 source of antioxidants in the American diet by a wide margin. Now, this speaks to two things. One is that coffee has a lot of antioxidants. The other is that most people in America are getting very little antioxidants. So it may be that if you consume plenty of antioxidants from fruits and vegetables and a wholesome, healthy diet, that coffee doesn't provide the same benefits. But we do know that for most Americans, the research is pretty overwhelming that coffee is associated with all sorts of positive health benefits. Now, the caffeine can be problematic for some people, like I mentioned. So listen to your own body. Coffee's not for everybody. And if you're a super healthy eater, we don't totally know. We don't have a lot of research on folks who are eating a super, super healthy, whole foods, plant-based diet. And then the tweaks of like, is coffee good or not? Is green tea good or not? Are the benefits reduced when you already have so many wonderful antioxidants from other sources? But again, based on the best available research that we have today, it seems to be pretty darn beneficial for most people. Sherry said, "Good morning. I hate to admit it, but I am confused about processed foods. As a newly vegan person, I'm inundated with products like tofu, plant butters, plant flours, plant milks, etc., which seem to be highly recommended in most vegan cookbooks. Aren't these products highly processed? Please clarify." Well, Sherry, thank you for asking. Now, you just named a few different things that are actually quite different in some cases. So tofu is something you could make in your own home. And that's one of the ways that I think about processing. Sure, some things are made with the help of machinery, but could you make it in your own home? You could absolutely get soybeans, which are a whole food, and make soy milk out of them. And then you could easily enough curdle that soy milk and press the curds into tofu. I've done it. I've done all of that in my own kitchen. So tofu, I do not consider a highly processed food. It's a lightly processed food, but it's not highly processed. Now you mentioned plant butters. Well, that depends. If you're talking about nut butters, those are just ground nuts, right? If you're talking about vegan butters, they vary. A lot of them have a lot of coconut or palm oil, salt, some other oils. Some of them are cultured. Coast makes a cultured vegan butter that also maybe has cashews in it or oats in it. Those may be a little more on the healthier side. They're not a health food, no question about it, the vegan butters, but they may be healthier than butter from cows. And, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. If a little bit helps you enjoy a whole foods plant-based diet, fabulous. But personally, I prefer to use avocados or, nut butters for fat sources most of the time. You asked also about plant milks. Well, those vary widely. Some of them are very processed. Some of them have a lot of added sugars. Others do not. Personally, I'm a pretty big fan of the unsweetened soy milks that contain no added sugars, of course, but also sometimes some of them are just water and soybeans. Eden Soy, for example, makes an unsweetened soy milk that is just water and soybeans, organic soybeans, and it contains 12 grams of protein per cup, which I think is pretty fabulous. Soy, as we've just heard in this last episode today, is associated with all kinds of positive health benefits. So I personally am a fan there. But if you don't like soy or soy isn't your thing, you can also go with various other unsweetened plant milks. You can also make your own, even in a Vitamix or a blender, where you blend up nuts or oats with water, maybe add a little bit of stevia or some other sweetener if you like, or some vanilla. And there's all kinds of wonderful recipes out there. If you go to foodrevolution.org and search for plant milks, you'll find some great recipes there. As far as some of the more other processed foods, the Beyond Meats and the various meat substitutes, the vegan cheeses, etc., some of them do get into the realm of processed or even highly processed. So, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Sometimes when you're making a transition, they are helpful and they're probably beneficial compared to their animal-based counterparts, but they're not generally going to be considered part of an optimal wholesome diet. And if we're looking for whole foods, plant-based, then you want to generally start steering away from those as you're able. But again, sometimes in the transition, some of these things can be helpful. Sometimes a spoonful of sugar, they say, makes the medicine go down. Sometimes adding a little bit of Beyond Meat to your bean chili will make it more tasty and more appealing, especially to folks in the family who might not normally eat that way. And that can be a really good thing. So see what makes sense for you, but hopefully that's providing some helpful feedback. Lil said, I have to admit my mind is spinning. I'm so glad I purchased the empowerment package so I can revisit it. Yes, Lil, thank you so much for letting us know that you're here, and we're so glad you got the empowerment package as well. For those who don't know, the empowerment package gives you lifetime access to all of the recordings and the transcripts of the entire summit for life, along with all the bonuses, so you can go back and watch and read anytime you want. And if you go with the advanced version, you also get the extended interviews, all of the interviews with all 45 experts in this Summit Plus transcript, so you can go deeper into my conversations with each and every one of them. Joseph said, unfortunately, I was not able to attend the webinar till now. I've been dealing with cancer for the past 10 plus years, and the doctors have just been monitoring me and saying everything is stable. However, the cancer has continued to grow and is now beyond any surgical options. I have advanced to stage 4. I would appreciate any help or advice you could give me. Well, Joseph, first of all, we send lots of love to you. I'm sorry that you're facing this. You're in the right place. So hopefully you found some value here today. And most of all, you're able to apply what you're learning in your life. And hopefully it's helpful to you. Lots of love to you. I'm not sure what type of cancer you're working with. It sounds like it might possibly be prostate or has started as prostate cancer. If so, check out the research of Dr. Dean Ornish on prostate cancer. Very powerful research there. Wherever you are in the journey and whatever the specifics, we're just sending you lots of love and prayers for your healing and wellness. Donna said, I'm a breast cancer survivor for 2 years, which I'm truly grateful for. It was an eye-opening experience and made me so much more aware of my lifestyle. I learned after the food that I was eating could have and was likely the cause of the cancer growth. Eye-opening. I've made changes to my diet, but I'm not fully plant-based. I'm trying so hard to change, but it's difficult due to cost, busyness of the day, and I need more knowledge. I love this series and I've learned a lot. Thank you for promoting health. Well, Donna, thank you for being here with us. We're so glad you're here and sending love and prayers for your healing, and we want to support you on that path. So we're going to gift you with a cookbook. Actually, Hay House, our publisher, will be sending it to you at our request. The cookbook is Real Superfoods, Everyday Ingredients to Elevate Your Health, because a lot of people do get busy and they don't know how to implement all this. And a cookbook, a really good cookbook with really great recipes, can really, really help. So Real Superfoods, Everyday Ingredients to Elevate Your Health will be on its way to you. Our team will follow up. By the way, for everybody who has been told in these announcements that our team will follow up with you to gift you an empowerment package or a cookbook or another resource, please do know that the way we do that is usually through Facebook Messenger, because we're responding to the comments using the Facebook stream. So please check your Facebook message accounts if you've been told that you're receiving a cookbook or an empowerment package, so our team can be in touch. Thank you so much. And please respond to those messages so we can work together to get it to you. Lynette said, when a diagnosis of Alzheimer's is made, can an optimal diet and lifestyle halt progression of the disease? Or is it a case of once diagnosed, progression is inevitable? Well, Lynette, there is a growing body of research showing that in the early stages of Alzheimer's diagnosis or other forms of dementia, diet and lifestyle can, in some cases, halt progression or slow it dramatically. In a few cases, we have even seen reversal of some of the symptoms early on. However, the more progressed it gets, the harder it gets for people to slow the progression or certainly to stop it or reverse it. And part of the issue is that people who are past a certain point have a hard time even complying with diet and lifestyle changes because they're not in a space to understand what's going on. But there's other aspects as well. So the earlier, the better. And of course, yesterday we focused a lot on brain health. And we know that the symptoms of Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia often occur fairly late in the game, that often the groundwork for these conditions is laid 20 or even 30 years prior, and then it continues to progress. So you don't want to mess around with this. The sooner you apply diet and lifestyle principles, the better your chances of postponing or preventing the condition. But absolutely, if a diagnosis has already happened, there's a lot you can do and should do to see what's possible to help slow progression or even stop it. There is hope. It has happened to quite a few people. Gabriella said, if you eat vegan do you eat vegan cheese? And if so, what brand? Gabriella, well, thanks for asking. Personally, my favorite is homemade. We have an article at foodrevolution.org. If you search for nut cheeses, you'll find out more about how to do that and some great recipes. But Miyoko's is the biggest brand, the large-scale brand that makes some I think, fairly fabulous nut cheeses. When I'm looking for vegan cheeses, I'm looking for ones that are based around cultured nuts rather than coconut oil and potato starch or some other form of starch. The reason you want the cultured nuts is that the cultures can be beneficial and nuts are a pretty healthy food. Coconut oil, on the other hand, is not particularly healthy, and a lot of the ones that use or feature coconut oil tend to be more highly processed. So looking for the cultured ones is great. They can be more expensive, which is why homemade can be good. It makes you really appreciate what the brands do, though, because it is some work, but it can be kind of fun. You actually can culture it in your cupboard for a few days after you blend up the ingredients. You want to use some culture in there. Anyway, check out the recipes. I go to foodrevolution.org and type in nut cheeses again to find the recipes we put together on this. Lucille said, I heard that eating 2 cups of mushrooms a week will keep one from having cognitive problems. Is this true? Well, Lucille, nothing is a guarantee of not having cognitive problems, but mushrooms are pretty fabulous. Let me say a few words about what's so great about them. They are a rich source of fiber. They're high in vitamins like B1 and B2, and in some cases they also contain B12 and vitamin D. They're rich in minerals. And although they're considered vegetables, mushrooms are actually part of the fungi kingdom. They're high in antioxidants like ergothioneine and glutathione, which protect against cellular oxidative stress. And we know that oxidative stress plays a significant role in neurodegeneration and can contribute to Alzheimer's risk, and that it also contributes to cancer. There is no specific amount of mushrooms that we know about that's kind of like a magic bullet against cancer or dementia, but the research is clear that mushrooms can be hugely beneficial in fighting dementia risk and cancer, and it's worth emphasizing that mushrooms are best consumed cooked, and that all the different varieties appear to have unique and potent benefits. So you don't have to eat super duper fancy versions to get benefits, although they do have benefits, but you can go with shiitake and oyster, but also regular old button mushrooms. There seem to be benefits from all kinds of mushrooms. The fungi kingdom really is an incredible ally to our health. Letitia said, is air frying food better or healthier than frying food in fat? Well, Letitia, in general, yes. Frying food in fat is no friend to your health, almost no matter what the food is. Now, let's talk a little bit about air fryers, though, because not everyone knows what they are, okay? So an air fryer is a small household kitchen appliance that can fit on a countertop. It looks a little bit like a toaster oven. It's got a fan that circulates hot air to cook food quickly in a mesh basket or tray from the outside in. And the small size, most range in capacity from 2 to 6 quarts, has 2 advantages. One is that it cooks food fast to allow for crisping without burning or drying out. and the other is that it doesn't take up too much counter space. The bad side is that they don't cook a whole lot of food at once, so you have to do kind of small batches. Some models retail for as little as $40. Others can cost as much as $300 or more. It all depends on the brands and the features that you want. Now, to be clear, humans have been brownie and crisping food for millennia, long before any air fryer was invented. So, and a lot of people do it in their ovens or sometimes even in the sun if you live in a hot place. The advantage of this appliance is that it takes a shorter time and it often doesn't require preheating. And in addition to frying, most models can also bake or grill or roast without any added oil. So big advantages are that it helps you get away from added oil, which is awesome. And foods can cook quickly. They work well for reheating leftovers. They're versatile, and they can add a nice crunch that makes a lot of foods more delicious for people, especially if you're going with vegetables. On the con side, some tests have found that air fryers generate acrylamides, especially in starchy foods like potatoes. And by the way, by far the main thing people use air fryers for is potatoes. Now, acrylamides is concerning because excessive amounts of them can cause mutations in the human body, and they may contribute to cancer risk. And there are ways to reduce acrylamide levels when you use an air fryer or even when you're baking or broiling foods, and one of them is to avoid cooking at a very high heat. For example, with potatoes, if you're grilling or broiling or air frying them, you want to keep the temperature below 180 degrees Celsius or 356 degrees Fahrenheit. You're also looking for a golden brown texture, but if they get too brown, that might be a sign that higher levels of acrylamide have formed in the crust. And if you soak your potatoes before you cook them, and if you don't store them in the fridge before cooking, that can also reduce acrylamide levels significantly. So hopefully that's helpful. If you want to learn more about air fryers, we have an article on it. If you go to foodrevolution.org and type in air fryer, you'll find it. A lot more about the pros and cons and benefits and some really cool recipes and the different models out there. Genevieve said, is store-bought organic ground flaxseed okay to use instead of freshly ground flaxseed? I'm pretty sure I would quit grinding it eventually because I'm trying to balance life. Well, Genevieve, thanks for asking. Here's the thing. If you do grind it yourself, it'll be fresher, and fresh is best. You don't want your flax getting rancid. That said, storing it in the fridge or freezer can preserve it much longer. You can grind it every week or two and just keep it in a bag in the fridge or a little container and then pop it out whenever you want. Or you can go with store-bought. See if there's an expiration date on there and make sure it's good and far away. And if you do go with store-bought, just make sure you're circulating it fairly quickly. And of course, keep it in the fridge, if not the freezer. So, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Store-bought flax meal is probably quite beneficial for most people as long as it isn't too old. But if you can do fresh, you'll save some money and you'll get fresher. And it isn't really that big a deal to just grind some up every couple of weeks. It just takes a couple minutes. So that's an option too. And we mix flax and chia in our home because I like variety, and they're both awesome ways to get omega-3s in your diet. Nancy said, good morning, got up late. Darn, love this summit. Well, Nancy, good for you for getting some sleep, and you're in luck because we will have replays. So as soon as we finish episode today, we will put it on replay, and you'll be able to watch the replay later if you missed anything. We heard from Julie Olson, who said, thank you for addressing diabetes. The heart episode was very eye-opening for me. I have type 2 diabetes, and this summer I was told my heart is being impacted. They almost put a stent in, but the surgeon, when he did an angiogram, said I don't need one yet. I'm at 40%. I want to work on this through lifestyle and nutrition, so I don't need a stent ever, but I do not know where to begin. I did not know where to begin, so thank you for this program. I'm listening intently and taking notes. Julie, thank you so much for sharing and for being here. And we want to support you in not needing a stent and applying all that you're learning for life. I'm so glad you're taking notes. We want to make that easier for you. So we're going to gift you with an empowerment package, so you will own it all for life and you can go back and listen anytime. And you'll also have the transcripts. That means that you can read. And one thing that's really cool, I think, about the transcripts is that we also include source links to studies that are cited. So if you want to learn more about a study that's mentioned by one of the speakers in one of these episodes, click the link and you can read all about it and go deeper into any topic that interests you. So congratulations, Julie. Our team will follow up with you. Make sure you check Facebook Messenger or Facebook Messages for a message from us. and we will be gifting you with an empowerment package. I know you'll put it to good use, and we're wishing you a healthy heart and a healthy life for many vibrant years to come. Congratulations. And congratulations also to all of our new empowerment package owners, including Deborah from Alaska, Lucille from Michigan, Susan from Idaho, Malcolm from California, Wanda from North Carolina, Patricia from New Hampshire, Josie from South Dakota, Nancy from Illinois, Marina from Utah, Sanjeev from India, Carolyn from Australia, Sean from Texas, Wendy from Nevada, and everyone else who is owning the empowerment package. We thank you for investing in your health, for taking the steps to own this all for life, and also for supporting our mission. Because with every empowerment package purchased, you help us to spread the word, to reach more people with this vital message. And also, we donate to Trees for the Future so they can plant an organic fruit or nut tree in a low-income community. Well, now it's time for our recipes of the day. Today, like every day of this summit, we offer 3 more fabulous whole foods plant-based recipes from Nicole D'Andrea Russert, Food Revolution Network's lead dietitian and recipe developer. Today we have omega-rich balsamic vinaigrette. This omega-rich balsamic vinaigrette is just one example of how you can really boost the nutritional value of a meal by adding a nutrient-dense dressing or sauce to it. It's packed with omega-3 fatty acids from the flax meal and anti-inflammatory compounds from the turmeric. You can drizzle it over the top of your favorite leafy greens or steamed veggies, or use it in lots of other places. Next, we have walnut and lentil stuffed mushrooms. The combination of toasted walnuts with warm lentils stuffed in baked mushrooms creates a hearty, flavorful, and exquisite appetizer that will enchant your guests or loved ones, as well as yourself. It'll look and taste like you labored over this appetizer for hours, but this dish is actually very simple to prepare. It's also bursting with lots of nutrition from walnuts, lentils, and mushrooms. And lastly, today we have the slow cooker greens, beans, and tempeh soup. This is a nourishing bowl of comfort that is simple to make and super satisfying. Tempeh sausage adds a savory flavor and satisfying texture to creamy butter beans, crunchy cabbage, and earthy Swiss chard. If you agree that nothing beats a warm and hearty bowl of soup, then we are pretty certain you will adore this recipe. All right. Well, thank you everybody for sharing in this wonderful day. And again, I want to remind you to keep posting and engaging in the comment section on the broadcast page, sharing your top takeaways, your ahas, your breakthroughs, what you're learning, what this means in your life, and your questions, and engaging with others. Alicia said, hello, Ocean. Thank you for what you do. I believe we caregivers need help on how to reach our family members at risk. I've been joining you here for several years. Now we have a newly added member, first in our family, who is on dialysis. This could have been prevented. As I mentioned to the rest of my family, kids, and siblings, you don't want to find yourself on dialysis. Learn from him, the member now on it. Eat right and exercise. Thank you, everyone here, for constantly getting us educated. Well, Alicia, yes, thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry that your family member is going through this. And a lot of us can relate, right, to this experience of wanting to spread the word, seeing what's at stake, what we're learning here, wanting to tell others. And so the first step, of course, is to model it yourself, right? Practice it. Give from an overflowing cup because you're taking care of yourself. Embody what we're talking about, right? Put your own oxygen mask on first, they say, before helping others. And then, of course, you want to spread the word and you want to share. You can, of course, still invite folks to join in this summit. We're only halfway through today. You can get an empowerment package and share what you're learning with others. You can get the Real Superfoods Cookbook and give it as a gift for others, or my own book, 31 Day Food Revolution, or the books by any of our speakers. There's some wonderful ones. You can get films and videos. Forks Over Knives is an amazing one, by the way, that's changed millions of lives. And you can just keep walking the talk. And we send so much love to all the caregivers out there, all the people who are caring for loved ones who are suffering or hurting right now. I think that being a caregiver is one of the most sacred acts in the universe, and it's often deeply underappreciated. You know, for all of us who have loved ones that are suffering, that need special attention or support, we need support too. We need health too. We need love too. And sometimes the giver gets depleted. So hopefully you're learning things here that can help you to replenish and nourish your precious self. Even if your main motivation is caring for others, well, you'll do it better from an overflowing cup. So much love to you and blessings to you on the journey. All right, well, we're now approaching the end of day 4 of the Food Revolution Summit docuseries. So I'll say again, to express your opinions on today's episode and the summit so far, and to find out what other folks are saying, post and engage in the comments section on our broadcast page. Make sure you refresh those comments so you can see the latest ones that have been submitted. And come on back and join us tomorrow when we go live at 7:45 Pacific Time, 10:45 Eastern, 2:45 GMT, where we're going to focus on the gut inflammation autoimmunity connection, getting to the root. New research is showing us that chronic inflammation is underlying most of the major illnesses of our time. It can show up as cancer or heart disease, Alzheimer's or allergies, autoimmune conditions, and all of these are often linked back to a single common source. So what causes chronic inflammation? How does it connect with your gut health? And more importantly, what can you do about it? Tomorrow, we're going to find out. So please come on back and join us tomorrow. And in the meanwhile, you can post your comments and share in the conversation. You can catch the replays right on this page as soon as we're done with this live broadcast. You can check out the empowerment package so you can own it all for life. You can make the recipes of the day, which you'll find right at the bottom of the broadcast page. We wish you a wonderful, healthy, and thriving day. This is Ocean Robbins signing off from day 4 in the Food Revolution Summit. And here's a peek at what's coming up tomorrow. Healthy and appropriate inflammation is critical to immune health and recovery from injuries of all kinds. But as we'll see in this episode, most people in the modern world live in a state of chronic inflammation. And this is the central driver behind most of the major ailments of our times.
When you have chronic inflammation, your body starts making changes in blood vessels. The immune system starts to go on overdrive.
When you're trying to measure inflammation, to me the most important thing is actually symptoms. You can see inflammation in a person.
The things that affect cardiovascular disease are inflammation first and foremost, and oxidative stress. So we have to always say, what is driving this inflammation?
And please keep in mind that depression, major depressive disorder, is primarily an inflammatory condition. It's been said that when a woman is pregnant, she has to be careful what she eats because now you're eating for two. Everybody on the planet has to be careful what they eat because they're all eating for trillions. That's the number of bacteria that depend on our food choices.
A really important study published in a very reputable journal called Cell from summer of 2021 by a fantastic research group out of Stanford looked at the use of fermented foods and showed that fermented foods actually lowers inflammation in the gut.
What foods are inflammatory? Well, the most pro-inflammatory components are saturated fat, trans fats. Where are they found? Animal foods, processed foods. The most anti-inflammatory food component in our food supply is fiber. Where's fiber found? Only one place, plant food.
In the gut inflammation autoimmunity connection, we'll look at what really causes inflammation and at how chronic inflammation is directly linked to your gut and to autoimmune conditions. Learn the steps you need to take now and why this is essential to living your most vibrant life. Let's do this. No matter where you come from or what you've been through, the simple truth is you are meant to thrive. You deserve boundless energy, a clear mind, and a lean and healthy body. You deserve to feel confident and clear about what you eat and why. The Food Revolution Summit is packed with insights, and trying to catch and absorb all of them can be hard. That's why we created the Empowerment Package. With your Empowerment Package, you can own the entire summit, plus all the transcripts and loads of bonus materials for life. Absorb this life-changing material at a pace that's comfortable and easy for you. Join this movement. Support this mission. Buy your Empowerment Package today.